So welcome everybody. It has already been a long, full session before, I understand, and very interesting topics already came up. But I'm very happy that now we have this panel on cosmopolitanism, on international law, and national interests. So with 4 really excellent speakers who will be able to shed light on these topics from really different perspectives. If I may briefly introduce who we have on the panel tonight, there is Katharina Lumpp. She is a representative of the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, the UNHCR in Germany. She has worked a lot on refugee issues, on return and reintegration of refugees in Afghanistan, among others. She has been in Egypt and also covering refugee issues for the whole MENA region from Amman, and since 2014 she's here in Germany. To my right directly we have the Kathleen Newland, I just learned. I always mispronounced your name before. Yeah. But, I'm very happy that you can join us from Washington, D.C. tonight. Kathleen is Senior Fellow and Co-founder of the Migration Policy Institute in Washington, D.C., and worked as a consultant to UNHCR, to the ILO, to the Office of the Secretary General of the United Nations before. And if you want to learn more about what she has been thinking about, analyzing, etc., check out the publications list on the internet. It's really impressive. A number of books, monographs, of chapters to books. So please, there is no shortage of expertise you can find online, but I'm very happy that we'll have a brief glimpse on that tonight here. To my left, we have Professor Aboubakr Jamai. I hope I don't mispronounce your name. Being the Dean of the School of Business and International Relations at the Institute of American Universities, as far as I understand, both in Aix-en-Provence and in Rabat. Your expertise is in the economic sector, but also in publishing. I read that you established websites and magazines, and that you also got a number of awards for publication and for press freedom, and you are a young leader of the World Economic Forum. So welcome also here. I apologize for that. And last but not least, Rebecca Harms, member of the European Parliament. I guess that many here in the room already had the pleasure to have Rebecca, to listen to her, to know her personally. She is the co-president of the Greens and the EFA group in the European Parliament. She has a number of offices there, and among others, she's on the Committee on Foreign Relations and also in the EU-Russia Parliamentary Cooperation Committee. Welcome, Rebecca. You just arrived now, so I'm really glad it was last minute. This is part of the reason why we're starting a bit belated. So I think that we really need discipline, both on the panel as well in the audience, when it comes to the limitation in time. We have approximately 1.5 hours, and therefore I would now directly like to hand over the floor to you, Katharina, to start. Thank you.
Good evening, and thanks for the invitation. I'm stepping in here for a colleague from Geneva, the Director of International Protection, unfortunately was not able to come at the last minute. Since the previous 2 panels have been very focused on Europe, and in particular on the situation within the European Union, as representing the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, I would limit my reflections to the broader international perspective. To begin with, it's important to bear in mind that access to international protection, regardless of the location of displacement, is not the responsibility of any one particular state. It's a shared global responsibility. The extraordinary scale and speed of forced displacement in recent years has made visible what is a global crisis that in fact has been developing for some time. The last largest voluntary repatriation movements which we have seen are more than a decade ago. It has added layers of displacement to multiple protracted situations and crises. One that was referred to was, for example, the refugee situation in and around Afghanistan. This has underlined the need for a longer-term holistic approach, from addressing root causes to greater international solidarity and cooperation, and to viable, durable solutions for refugees. And the fact that it was in 2015, through the large-scale movements of asylum seekers and refugees into Europe, that has brought this discussion on asylum to the fore again, and to the fore of also the public discourse in Europe, in a way is positive but also very telling. The realities of large movements into Europe are past and present and ongoing realities for many, many countries around the globe, and in particular for developing countries. It is a fact that now and in the past, 80% of the world's refugees are in the developing world. In the face of immediate, visible, and enormous challenges, these countries have shown a resilience and have ensured access to protection and to asylum for millions in need. The capacity of states to receive refugees is very relative. It was also mentioned that Lebanon, for example, is currently hosting over 1 million Syrian refugees on a population of 4.5 million and a GDP of 45 million only. Other factors may influence capacity as well, and they include factors that here in the European debate we don't discuss, for example, environmental factors. It's important in this discussion about capacity to keep in mind the relative contributions that states in different situations can make when we consider what is reasonable or possible for them. In this context, the principle of responsibility sharing is vital in ensuring that international protection continues to be made available to those who need it, and also in the realization that refugee challenges are inherently transnational and they cannot be addressed by one state or a few states alone. The preamble of the 1951 Convention, in fact, recognizes and underlines this. It states that the grant of asylum may place unduly heavy burdens on certain countries, and a satisfactory solution of a problem of which the United Nations has recognized the international scope and nature cannot therefore be achieved without international cooperation. This speaks from our perspective to the most critical protection gap we are facing today, the need for a global compact on predictable and equitable burden and responsibility sharing. In a world in turmoil, it was mentioned, with over 60 million persons fleeing, we need to make such a global compact a reality. And in this context, I think it's important also for the discussion in Europe that there is a plan for a high-level meeting of the General Assembly on 19 September this year, for which the Secretary General has recently issued a report. The report is entitled "In Safety and Dignity, Addressing Large-Scale Movements of Refugees and Migrants." It notes that receiving states cannot meet the essential needs of refugees alone, and that other member states need to share this responsibility. And it makes quite a number of concrete suggestions and recommendations on what such a global compact on sharing responsibility could encompass. For example, from the outset of an emergency phase until durable solutions are achieved and attained, that investments must be made in the capacities of refugees, of national authorities, and of local authorities, as well as of communities. It was mentioned also before the importance to support not only refugees and address their needs, but also support and strengthen communities and local and national authorities in receiving refugees. Responsibility sharing by member states also extends to relieving some of the pressures on host countries by expanding and by diversifying means of admissions. It was mentioned, those legal pathways, safe pathways of admission for refugees in countries. In our perspective, this should be at least for those for whom resettlement needs have been identified, which is normally about at least 10% of a refugee population that has very specific, particular needs for which resettlement is considered both a tool of protection as it is also a safe pathway to a third country. We promote in this regard enhanced resettlement, but also medical evacuation, humanitarian admission programs, but also programs that provide opportunities to refugees for skilled migration, labor mobility schemes, education scholarship schemes, and very importantly, family unification, including family unification not to members of extended families and communities. We do consider that these pathways provide also viable alternatives to dangerous, irregular, so-called irregular movements. An important answer to the question on capacities and the willingness to admit refugees lies also in another aspect, namely in what refugees can contribute to host societies. There are now a growing number of studies that indicate that host societies actually benefit tremendously from the presence of refugees. Both economically, that was mentioned, but also socially and culturally. These positive contributions that refugees and migrants make to host communities should be acknowledged, and they must be highlighted and underlined. The public discourse must again be shifted away from one of threat to one of international solidarity and of a recognition of the positive contributions to host communities and societies that refugees make. In our perspective, the debate about asylum and the protection of refugees in today's realities of larger scale movement calls really for concerted focus and a commitment to sharing responsibility for hosting refugees more fairly globally. And the recognition that responsibility sharing is actually the core of the international protection regime as it's reflected in the preamble to the 1951 Convention, in successive General Assembly resolutions, and in regional refugee instruments, in fact, including in Europe, where Article 80 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union also refers to the principles of solidarity and responsibility sharing among states, and not only among states within the European Union, but globally. Thanks.
Thank you very much. A number of really important points in a very, very short time. Rebecca, do you think talking about shared responsibility and dignity and safety for refugees, new approaches, could you maybe shed light on that from your perspective?
So I had so far more experiences with United Nations approach of shared responsibility to fight global warming. So looking back for 2 decades, thinking about how long it took to achieve what we achieved in Paris in COP21, still not having achieved the real turn from emissions, not going up but going down. So I hope that in this challenge with refugees, because also we are dealing with people. Yeah, it will be possible that in the United Nations we do better and we act faster than we did in this huge problem of global warming, which contributes to the new and challenging refugee crisis. So what can I tell you on the European Union? I think what has changed in the European Union since the refugees last year in September arrived on their march in Budapest, so in one of the big cities, one of the centers of the European Union, what has changed is that the refugee issue and this crisis is not any longer put aside, because for a very, very long time in the European Union we discussed in moments of shock when another boat was missing in the Mediterranean and another 500 or 800 people had died in the Mediterranean. But we for a very, very long time, there was no structured discussion on the problem and what is the European role in this problem and in the solutions. So this is at least one of the good points, that nobody right now in the European Union tries really to escape the refugee problem. On the other hand, since last year in September, when in some of the member states of the European Union we thought we would go to a new era of refugee strategy, compared to what we called the Willkommenskultur, at least in Austria, in Germany, in Sweden. Compared to this, we are again in a pretty depressing situation, because again the Europeans are trapped into a discussion focused on how to avoid the reception of too many refugees. So if I would be asked how to describe the actual strategy in the European Union, so it's dominated by the idea the less people come to Europe, the better. The less people we have to distribute in the European Union, the better. And again, there is a tendency in the proposals by the European Commission how to develop the Dublin system to leave the main burden in so normal situations, the main burden of refugees arriving in Europe, to leave it to the border, to the countries along the external borders of the European Union. Only in that what they are discussing and proposing, only in cases of urgencies, the European Union would have a regular relocation mechanism to redistribute arriving people from Greece or Italy or from the islands like Cyprus to the rest of the European Union. So it's politically still a very poor situation. Everybody knows the discussion on the Turkey deal. I saw a lot of comments, negative comments on this Turkey deal, and I heard again and again that the European Union, especially Germany, is so selling out themselves or Merkel herself to Erdogan with this deal. But the problem with the deal is there would be not necessarily such a deal in case the European member states would be more open to receive more refugees, for example, from Turkey or from other countries in the neighborhood of Syria. And so the weakness of this deal is not in the deal itself. The weakness is in the European Union and the tendency to refuse to receive more refugees from countries which are right now dealing mainly with the refugee crisis. How to escape? I have no clue. I hoped that Already the Vienna Conference by the United Nations organized especially on people from Syria and their destinies, that this conference would bring a better result. The target was not that ambitious. The target was to bring over the next 2 years 500,000 people in special need, from Syria or from neighboring countries to Europe via resettlement quota, fixed quota, organized by the United Nations. I don't know what was the outcome, but I think the number of refugees, states from the European Union and some other rich states in the world, the number they agreed to receive was below 150,000 for 2 years. So I think we have in the European Union a tough job to convince some of the countries to go ahead and to be more ambitious and more generous in receiving of refugees in real need for protection. I don't know whether we will achieve this. Yeah? I'm very much in favor of focusing on this idea of direct resettlement. Since some time, I'm convinced that this idea of direct resettlement is creating more safety and certainty for refugees, but also for the societies which shall receive the refugees. But I don't know where we will end in this battle, and therefore I think we have in the same time to do more on the other pillars for better protection of refugees. For the refugees from Syria is for me still clear that we have to engage as European Union with Jordan, with Lebanon and with Turkey also, because it would be completely crazy to leave this very, very demanding situation only to those societies, because they are much weaker than the Europeans are, especially if you count the European Union member states all together. And I think this should not be forgotten, that the improvement of the situation for refugees outside of the EU, especially facing the situation that the European Union member states are again organizing fences. We can talk on this later. I visited recently the fence in between Serbia and Hungary. Is a bit a forgotten focus, but it will be a new focus. But facing the situation that the European member states are reorganizing their fences instead of their receiving reception centers or their integration programs, I think it's very, very important also to discuss on the alternative pillars or additional pillars for helping those people who are in need.
Thank you, Rebecca. I think from here I would very much like to hear your view. You come from a country in which there are actually some fences, and there is pressure from the EU also on Morocco to try and deal with what Europe doesn't want to have as a problem inside Europe. So please, Aboubakr, share with us what you think.
Yeah, one of the difficulties of talking about countries from the Middle East is the very diversified situation there. So I don't think you can have one depiction that will fit, will describe all situations, but let me attempt to do that. First of all, some figures were given, and let me say a few more words about Lebanon just to grasp the magnitude of the refugee crisis for Lebanon. The Syrian refugees constitute a third of the Lebanese population. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the Lebanese politics makeup, they know how demographics are important because the political system is based along sectarian lines. The last time there was a demographic crisis in Lebanon. It led to something called the Civil War, and it lasted from 1975 to 1990 almost. So that's what we are talking about. So if you take off your European lenses and you put on your Lebanese lenses or your Jordanian lenses, where the Syrian refugees constitute a fifth of the population, that you might begin, to see things a little bit differently here in Europe. Should I really harp on the Libyan theme? A failed state, now it became a major route for immigration. Let me underscore the case of Tunisia. I don't think we have said enough how the Tunisians have fared very decently towards Libya while they were in the midst of their own problems, and how they received over 1 million refugees from Libya. Granted, most of those Libyans were from the middle class, etc., and then helped probably dynamize a little bit the Tunisian economy. But still, they were open to this influx. Now, let me take the case of Morocco and try to explain why and how difficult the situation for these countries is. First of all, Morocco is a country of immigration, but it also becoming a country of emigration because of the sub-Saharan influx of refugees and migrants. For those of you who don't know, Morocco, it has one of the worst performances when it comes to economic development and social development. I think it's on par with Yemen, Djibouti, etc. when it comes to the HDI, the Human Development Index. Use issues of poverty. I used to give this simple example. I guess you're all familiar with Marrakesh, probably went to Marrakesh. The region of Marrakesh, you might not know that, but according to the multidimensional index of poverty produced by an organization linked to Oxford University, the region of Marrakesh is the second poorest region in the Arab world. So literally, you leave Marrakesh, you are in the second poorest region of the Arab world. So this is, Morocco has a lot of things going for it, but this is also another aspect of Morocco. Secondly, if you put your shoes, if you put yourself in the shoes of the Moroccan regime, you will see two things. You will understand why, well, Morocco needs to keep this flow of Moroccan migrants going to the north. Two major reasons. One, which is shared by many other Arab countries, is called joblessness. If there is one characteristic, one specificity of the Middle East, is not the unemployment rate, is the youth unemployment rate, which is extremely high. So in other words, it's a political risk for the country. It's of course economic, social, etc., but it's a political risk for the country to keep these masses of youth being jobless. Easy. They were probably, I mean, the dust hadn't settled yet to come up with a definitive list of the reasons that led to the Arab Spring. But I think there is a large consensus over the fact that the demographics that were mostly behind the triggering of the Arab Spring are the youth and the jobless youth. So this is a major problem. So from the perspective of Morocco and other countries, well, the economy has not developed enough to be able to offer jobs to all these people, and hence it's in its interest to let people go to Europe, where most of the time, and I'm very glad that some of the speakers before mentioned Ms. Balfour, I think, mentioned the fact that if there is migration, because there is a demand for it. One of the reasons that the main destination of Moroccan migration is Italy and Spain, it's because there was a demand for this type of labor in Italy and Spain, and less so France. The second reason is something called remittances. Now, for those of you who are familiar with Middle Eastern politics, there is a concept that was invited by political scientists for the Middle East. It's called the rentier state model. Is the notion that the states, because mostly it's about oil and mineral resources, because they have this oil, this mineral, this gas, etc. What they do, they buy social peace literally. So they offer their population, free health, free education, etc., etc. But they can talk. They don't have a voice in the agora. Well, for Morocco, oil is remittances, because from a political economy standpoint, it really fulfills the same role and even a better role, because oil money can be mismanaged. Remittances money is the best managed money, aid, development money you could ever find. Why? Because it goes directly, naturally, to the demographics that need the money, whereas oil money can be mismanaged by the power elites. And this money constitutes around 7% of Moroccan GDP, right? There were studies that have been done, I think in 2000, that showed that if one has the magical power to basically close down the spigot of remittances, 1 million Moroccans will fall into abject poverty the day after. So that's how important remittances are. So remittances are, from a political economy standpoint, an extremely important resource, a stabilizing resource, and some might claim one of the main engine of the persistence of authoritarianism, right? Because the state and the power elites don't have to tax their population and enter into some kind of negotiation with their own population which is basically what democratization is about, to get the kind of social peace that keep the country peaceful. So these are, and of course, I think needless to talk about the emigration side, that Moroccans are asked to be the policemen of Europe. Look at the United States and all its might, and United States is unable to police properly its border with Mexico. What do you think how do you think Morocco can perform with its absence of natural borders with the rest of Africa? So it is a heavy burden for Morocco to shoulder, to be the policeman of Europe. Now, let me finish on I think on a key point about what would be, quote unquote, the solution. And I heard earlier that, well, we have tried the recipe of democratization, development, and we've seen what happened. I think one of the speakers mentioned the fact that, well, we ended up having middle. I don't know if the speaker was talking about the Arab world in particular, but let's assume, sorry if I do him injustice, let's assume he was talking about the Arab world. Not the Arab world, I shouldn't say the Arab world, the Middle East. Then we had the middle class, and the middle class turned out to be conservative, turned out not to be interested in democracy. Well, let me behind the man, or let me quote the man that Churchill called the half-naked seditious fakir, Gandhi, when he was asked, and you're probably familiar with the quip, when he was asked, what do you think about Western civilization? His answer was, it would have been a great idea, right? Yes, democracy promotion would have been a great idea from the EU, you know. Do we really need to beat that dead horse of not only the efficiency of EU democracy promotion in the Arab world, the reality of it, really, should we go back to that? Should we remind people how the EU treated Ben Ali in Tunisia? Have we really gone down that route of promoting democracy in the Arab world? And the reason I'm saying this, it's because I thought that the Tunisian case has laid to rest this chimera of using the dictatorial regimes to get stability. Because 1 minute before Bouazizi lit up his match in 2011, Tunisia was one of the most stable countries in the Arab world. This young man lit up his match, stability was out of the window. So what is exactly the alternative of having democratization? What is exactly the alternative of having co-development and economic development? I'm still waiting for this answer. So let me backtrack a little bit and say, well, maybe we need to revise the way we try to promote all these important policies. The reason that we have a huge ratio of youth in employment, it's because we thought that, or we accepted the fairy tale that you can have a market-based economy without having the proper political institution to manage a market economy. And we ended up with what? We ended up with the Ben Ali mafia, we ended up with the Mubarak mafia, we ended up with the mafias that we have in Morocco. Okay? So maybe we need now to understand that in order to have entrepreneurship in our countries, well, maybe we need an independent judiciary, right? And maybe we need politicians who are accountable to their own citizens. And maybe the EU might maybe promote that agenda a little bit harder. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for these strong and very clear statements. It is very tempting to enter a discussion with all of you right on the spot, but first I would really like to hear your perspective as an expert on migration issues, but also sometimes we have the impression in Europe that all the problems we are currently struggling with for you are a bit far in the United States. So please let us know.
Well, I'm sorry to, is this on? I'm sorry to keep us from that discussion, so I'll try to be relatively quick. As you know, I was asked to talk about the US/American perspective on the refugee crisis. And I take this formulation as an invitation to make a distinction between the US government and the American public, because the opinions can be very different between the two. And of course, when talking about the US government, you have to make a distinction between the executive branch and the legislature and the different levels of government, state and cities. So I want to spend a couple of minutes on each of these and then finish up with a few words about refugee integration in the US. Migration and refugee policy is legally in the hands of the executive branch, the president, the State Department, and so on, but of course the politics is a different matter. The executive branch places great value on US leadership on humanitarian issues. So how does it exercise what it perceives as its leadership? It's mainly, these days, as a donor. The US has put a little over $4 billion into the Syrian refugee situation so far. We routinely provide about a quarter of the budget of the main international agencies that work on humanitarian issues, that is UNHCR, the International Committee of the Red Cross, the International Organization for Migration, and the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees in the Near East. We also exercise leadership through refugee resettlement. The US has the largest resettlement program in the world by far, by an order of magnitude, I think. In the last 3 years, each year, we've resettled 70,000 refugees. This year, it is expected to be 85,000, and next year, the administration has called for 100,000. Now, these are refugees who are selected by the United States and screened and processed overseas, and then brought to the United States. After a year, they become permanent residents, and after 5 years, can apply for citizenship. As a country of asylum, we don't do so well. These days are protected by our geography from the turmoil that is enfolding the Middle East, North Africa, and Europe. But we have our own issues. Last year, we received some 165,000 unaccompanied children and their families from Central America, fleeing mostly from gang violence and a sort of breakdown of governance. 165,000 looks small compared to Europe at the moment, but you know, it's a substantial number of people to deal with, especially when they have the particular needs that unaccompanied children have. When we have been the country of destination for other spontaneous flows, we've usually reacted badly. Setting up direct returns to Haiti, to Cuba, to other Caribbean countries without giving people a full asylum hearing, a position which has been upheld by the US Supreme Court. But focusing on the US as a donor, I think one way of looking at the administration's priorities is to look at how the budget breaks down. Just very briefly, and I'm only looking at the State Department budget. There are other parts of the US budget that are involved with refugees once they reach the United States. But the total migration refugee account in the State Department this year is just a little under $3 billion. And of that, a little over 2/3 goes to overseas refugee assistance. That is funding programs to support refugees in camps, in urban settlements, mostly in fairly conventional ways, although the US government has been following UNHCR's lead and trying to think of some more innovative ways to support refugees, like giving them cash instead of commodities, encouraging host countries to allow refugees to work legally, opening access to education, and so on. But 2/3 goes to overseas assistance to refugees, much of it through the international agencies and NGOs. The other third is divided, not quite evenly, between refugee resettlement and support for the international system that deals with refugees. That is, support for UNHCR and IOM, ICRC, and UNRWA. And then an emergency fund of about $50 million. So you see that the emphasis on that the U.S. places as a donor is fairly conventional. Our resettlement program this year, we're attempting to resettle 10,000 Syrian refugees out of our 70,000 overall. It's a drop in the bucket. We're hoping to increase it, but congressional and state opinion is making that extremely difficult. That conventional approach is sort of carrying over to the September summits that Katharina mentioned. The U.S., after the UN General Assembly summit, is hosting what they call a U.S. Leaders Summit on Refugees, which is a pledge conference, and you're only invited as a country, you're only invited to participate if you are prepared to make new and significant commitments to strengthen the international response to the global refugee crisis. So they hope to generate 30% more funding for humanitarian response, to double resettlement places, and to facilitate self-reliance and increased education for refugees. And we'll see if that is more successful than some of the other pledging conferences that have taken place so far this year. Now, when it comes to the U.S. public, the public opinion, the U.S. public is deeply confused. Most people don't make a distinction between resettled refugees, asylum seekers, unauthorized immigrants, regular immigrants, tend to sort of lump people into the same basket. But generally, the idea of the United States as a country of refuge still has resonance for the American public. You know, the Statue of Liberty and all that still does have a positive value to Americans, to most Americans. And the support, particularly for the refugee resettlement program, has for a long time had very strong bipartisan support. And it's only in the last couple of years that started to break down. What I think we are seeing is a version of what Piotr Buras in the previous panel referred to in Poland as the political rhetoric shifting public opinion in a negative way. The confusion of the U.S. public is shared, if not created, by the political class. For example, after the terrorist attacks in Paris, several U.S. state governors, nearly 30 of them by now, announced with stunning lack of logic that they were no longer willing to resettle Syrian refugees in their states, as if Syrian refugees had anything to do with the Paris attacks, as if the attackers were not French and Belgian-born children of mostly Moroccan immigrants. But that, as I say, the public is very confused. There has been a lot of pushback in those states from NGOs, from church groups, from businesses, from mayors of particular cities who are saying, yes, we do want to resettle refugees, and we particularly want to resettle Syrian refugees. And of course, the governors have no legal authority to limit refugee resettlement, but resettlement agencies don't want to resettle people into communities where they are patently unwelcome. So the picture is confused right now, but the administration and many other political leaders remain committed to a strong U.S. role, both as a country of resettlement and as a humanitarian donor. I want to just make a couple of references to a relatively new poll out on U.S. public opinion on immigration. As I said, most Americans don't really make a distinction. But in that poll, which was just a couple of months ago, 59% of Americans said that they agreed with the statement that immigration strengthens the country through immigrants' hard work and talents. 33% said immigrants were a burden because they take jobs and housing and health care away from other Americans. What's sort of encouraging about that is that in 1994, those proportions were reversed. In 1994, 63% of the public said refugees were a burden, and only 31% said they strengthened the country. So progress has been made. I mentioned the increased partisanship. In this same poll, 78% of Democrats agreed that refugees strengthened the country. 35% of Republicans agreed. So I think you see that impact of political rhetoric. One of the most encouraging things about that poll to me was that 76% of millennials, that is, people born after 1980, said they thought refugees strengthened the country. 60% of Gen Xers, that is, born between 65 and 1980, agreed. 8% of boomers, that is my generation, born between 1946 and 64, and 41% of the silent generation, the World War II generation. So each generation currently, this is just a snapshot, is more inclined to look upon refugees positively. Now, maybe we all get more conservative as we get older, but I think that this probably represents a genuine shift toward greater cosmopolitanism, greater exposure, and so on. And of course, the more people are exposed to refugees and immigrants, the more positive an opinion they tend to have. Just one quick word about integration and refugees who are resettled in the U.S. It is generally quite successful over time. 1 million Vietnamese refugees who are resettled in the U.S. now have a median household income higher than the native-born. That's true of most other national origin groups have median incomes nearly as high or as high as the native-born. My institute studied indicators of integration like educational attainment, income, English language proficiency, use of public assistance, access to health insurance, and so on. And the results, not uniform across all groups, but are generally quite positive. I might add that among the most successful groups are predominantly Muslim refugees in the US. But in all cases, outcomes improve over time. And the lesson of that is that integration takes time. Many first-generation refugees and immigrants consciously sacrifice their own prospects for those of their children. And so I think when we insist that, you know, in the first generations that people have to integrate instantly is perhaps not quite understanding the dynamics of the motivations that people have when they integrate, when they move. The good outcomes in the U.S. are interesting because the U.S. integration programs are quite minimalist, laissez-faire, and as you know, our social safety net is weak. But we have a very flexible labor market. We have a tradition of immigration and generally positive attitudes toward it. And we have a very active network of NGOs who are deeply involved in refugee resettlement, who in fact are contracted by the government to help resettle refugees. And I think this is a critical element of our success. Another critical element is a very positive attitude toward family reunification. We have a separate category of refugee admissions for people who already have relatives in the United States. And I think that's a big, a huge positive factor for integration. And when I see European countries limiting family reunification, either in time or in numbers, I think that's such a self-defeating outcome from the point of view of integration, because people who are still worrying about their families, who are still looking back to their country of origin rather than looking forward with their families are less likely to be really focused on integration. And of course, in the European case, it is tremendously skewing the sex ratio, which is another really negative factor for positive integration outcomes. So I think the lessons of our experience on integration is that people mostly help themselves, but they need to have their efforts need to be facilitated by governments and by public services, particularly in language acquisition. And I think Germany has some wonderful programs in that respect and some wonderful plans. But that integration takes time and that it can't be ordered. It has to be organic, and it has to take place. It has to be a two-way street. It has to take place in cooperation with the host communities over a considerable period. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I already mentioned that it's very tempting to engage with all of you, and therefore I would take the privilege of having the microphone to ask a quick round of questions to all of you. Meanwhile, please think about the questions you'd like to ask and how to phrase them rather shortly, because we're now shortly before 8 and we only have half an hour left. So please think about it. And after we have brief glimpses from all of you on certain issues, I would like to ask you to join the discussion. Katharina, I may ask you one thing. You, from your long experience with the United Nations, it's not a secret that now we are facing the biggest refugee crisis for decades, that the issue is ever more pressing. We've also heard it on the panel. Everybody's somehow feeling the pressure of movements and the new challenges. How far would you say are states in accepting this? I mean, talking about the national interests that everybody tries to preserve, how far would you say is the readiness already to deal with these issues and to come closer to the global compact that you initially mentioned?
Well, I do think that, in particular with the spontaneous arrivals in Europe, that has boosted attention and also the understanding that something needs to be done. We had just, I'm trying to be realist, but I am hopeful looking at developments to date, and we had between 2010 and 2014 among European Union member states, they made up for never more than 10% of the resettlement admissions globally. Now, if we look at the calls and the plans that the pledges that have been made for resettlement and for other forms of admissions, we are seeing a significant increase also from within the European Union member states, and we are seeing in particular some of the diversification of programs, admission programs that we've been calling for, and we see an increasing number of countries participating in one form or another. One can say that's still far short of obviously the 10%, but let's take the Syrian registered refugees at about 4.5 5.8 million in the region, and we have to date over 200,000 pledges for places. That's a step in the right direction. Similarly, with the Syria situation, there was unique so far in the history of humanitarian appeals, but it took those departures to Europe. We had the most successful ever pledging conference, the London conference for the Syria situation, which raised in one single day over $11 billion US. That has never happened. Then there are other elements, and that was one of the discussions at the that started with the Syria refugee response, and was one of the discussions in Istanbul at the World Humanitarian Summit. Is both the aspect of more multi-year, more predictable humanitarian funding, but it's also, and we see that increasingly, indeed that development actors and international financial institutions come in, looking at how national systems, host communities, national authorities, local authorities can be supported through different mechanisms than humanitarian assistance. So I do think that there are lots of steps in the right direction and elements of such a compact shaping. It's still far from what is required in view of the humanitarian needs and the numbers of refugees, but it is all incremental steps, and hopefully at the two meetings in September there will be more, and maybe there will also be other situations in which these elements come to play much more forcefully than so far.
Well, it's nice that there are some reasons to be a bit optimistic, and small steps are great, and more openness. However, I'm afraid that the dimension of the problem is just so big that we also need maybe to address some other issues. And therefore, I would basically like the three of you to reflect on issues. You mentioned some of the reasons why people are fleeing, and basically to avoid having more refugees, we would all need to think about how to address the reasons why people are fleeing in the first place, or sometimes maybe talking about the welcome culture here. It drops out of the focus that in the first place people should not feel forced to flee, and we've heard of the three regions like criminal gangs in Central America being one reason. Syria, it is very clear why people are fleeing, but with a focus on Syria, which is only one country, we sometimes might also lose from the focus that there were plenty of countries in Africa from which there is a pressure to migrate, where there might be economic reasons, where there might be political reasons. So maybe each of you could give a short view on how you see the balance that currently is in the debate between being helpful for refugees and trying to address the refugee issues, and between addressing reasons of people why they flee in the first place. Would you like to start?
Sure. I think one of the promising developments of the last, really only of the last year, has been a much closer dialogue in the beginning of programs involving the humanitarian responders and the development agencies together. So for the first time, really, the World Bank has started to pay attention to forcible displacement and to livelihoods, and responding to the realities that, as Katarina mentioned, repatriation of displaced people has reached almost an all-time low. So people who are displaced for much longer, for long periods of time. Half of the refugees are displaced for 5 years or more, and some of them are into the third generation of refugees. So I think more of an emphasis on livelihoods and on employment, on gaining access for refugees to the international labor market are really sort of promising developments and are starting to bear fruit. There's, a cliche, I'm sure you've heard it, that humanitarian problems don't have humanitarian solutions. And so, of course, the long-term answer for this is to bring greater stability to the countries that are generating refugees. And by that, I don't mean the stability of the grave or the stability of the dictatorship, but genuine participatory development that is supported by the people whose governments are trying to promulgate that kind of development, and of course, ultimately the end to the wars that are displacing people. So if we could bring peace and development to the entire world, we would have nothing to worry about. That's a tall order.
Rebecca, how do you discuss this issue when you're in the European Parliament? I mean, is the refugee crisis and the perception overflooding all the other discussions about what should happen outside Europe's borders?
So I think everybody knows a bit the development in the European Union among the different member states. So the refugee issue is splitting societies in single member states, and the refugee issue is right now splitting or contributing to a deepening of the gap in European Union, in between member states. And so we are in a very, very demanding situation because we have now to tackle both sides of this problematic development. On the one hand, we have to deliver better for people in need, be it refugees from Syria or other regions closer to the European Union. And we have, in the same time, to fix the internal political problems which are also caused by the new experience with a crisis which for a too long time Europe was not willing to see. Yeah, so it was from my perspective is so the ignorance of the European member states, not the European Union. In this issue, I would really like to protect the EU level. Yeah. In the European Commission, there was much more awareness since long on the needs, but the responsibility for refugee issues is with the member states, and the member states decided in favor of the Dublin regulation and decided with all the renewals of the Dublin system, they always decided in favor of ignoring the dimension of the problem and leaving especially the southern states of the European Union with the problem alone. Yeah? And so how to come out? Yes, I also like to think positive, and that the issue is on the agenda, as I said, it's really different now. Yeah? So it's changing the discussions. It's much more so engagement around this issue, especially in the European Parliament, but also in the European Commission. But we depend with our solutions on the support from the member states. So it's impossible to go for ambitious solutions together with the United Nations in case big players among the member states refuse contributions. France, for example, increased the problem in Germany a lot because France from the very beginning said, no, we will not follow this Merkel way of dealing with the problems. We have our own problems, and we will not accept so more people as we did before. UK escaped completely. Yeah, we always discuss about Poland and the smaller member states in the east, but the real problems have been caused by the bigger and old member states of the European Union. And so there will be again this next step of the discussion with the United Nations. I hope really that the outcome will be better and that European Union will be able to agree on higher quotas for direct resettlement. I'm not sure. In addition, we have in the European Union the problem that even if we would be more generous, I say, it sounds strange, but they are really very narrow-minded in the quotas they are discussing. So they have to become more generous. But in the same time, we have the problem that while we are discussing on the regular ways to Europe, we have still this so-called irregular marches towards the European Union. And so this will not end. What we saw yesterday and today in the news with the new boats arriving from Libya to the Italian coast. So we have also to deal with this, because everything what we are agreeing with the United Nations will not be sufficient to stop the irregular movements to Europe, because it's quite normal that people from poorer regions or regions suffering from a war or civil war, that they are trying to go to the richer parts or more stable parts of the world. I have also, for example, right now no clue how we will be able to tackle the issue of migration. Because not being able with asylum seekers and war refugees, in the same time we face that we need urgently good migration laws, because many of those people I meet in Greece or recently at the border of Hungary, so they are not asylum seekers or refugees from Syria or from Iraq. They are coming from countries because in which they have no good perspective, and they read in the internet that they told me that Germany is open, Austria is open, Sweden is open, and that they would like to go there to find a better life. We urgently need migration rules, laws for the European Union. We need a common and valid asylum system to be applied, but we are already not managing to agree on a good resettlement quota for Syria refugees with the United Nations. So Europe is in a very, very difficult situation, and I hope that we will contribute with more political discussions to rational solutions. It's very, very difficult in the European states right now to discuss on those issues in a rational way, because in the societies in the European Union, irrationality and anxiety and fears are dominant in the discussion, even among people who should not fear nothing from refugees, because they are very, very well established in our societies.
I think there is a word we've been dancing around this whole day, which is Islam. And I think the reason, at least I've been dancing around it, so I'm not blaming anyone, I'm blaming myself. And the reason I'm saying this, it's because I think it's a little bit too easy to lay the blame on European political elites. European political elites, Europe is a bunch of democratic countries and one of the most accomplished democracies in the world, which means that political leaders, they do respond to democratic incentives. So the question is, how is it that we end up with the far right gaining so much ground? And it has to do with the conversation that is basically revolving around not only about the economic state of Europe, which did play a role, that's true. It's the fact that this refugee crisis hit at the moment where Europe was not doing very well economically is a very salient, important point. But also at the moment where there is a certain image of Islam and of Muslims, and of course with what's happening in Syria with ISIS. And I'm saying this because I think it's very important to have a more knowledgeable, more reasonable debate, conversation about Islam and politics. And let me offer a few, my personal, insights on this issue. And for those of you who don't know them, give you some good news on that front. Let's begin with Tunisia. One of the reasons that Tunisia was able to become the first democracy in the Arab world with a lot of problems, but still a democracy, it's because there was a constitutional moment. In other words, the event without which you don't have a proper constitution, democratic constitution. And this event is when two opposed ideological camps sit down and decide how to disagree peacefully. That's what it means. And how to preserve minority rights, collective rights, etc., etc. Happened before the revolution. It happened in 2005, in October 2005, between Nahda and the leftists. So it happened. The last iteration of this stage of this evolution is Nahda now announcing, although I have to tell you I don't understand exactly what it means, but announcing that they renounce political Islam, but still, it illustrates an interesting dynamics. Whenever we talk about the Arab Spring, I never fail to remember that in fact there was a proto-Arab Spring that we have forgotten about, which happened in the late 80s, early 90s. I was always scandalized whenever the Americans claimed that thanks to them, the Arab world knew its first democratic elections in 2000 and in Iraq. Was it in 2006? I don't remember. I think it was in 2005, 2005. Well, Algeria had democratic elections. Arafat was democratically elected in 96. But what happened in Algeria? Algeria was the turning point where the first steps toward something more liberal turned against toward dictatorship. We had a civil war in Algeria. Why? Because the democratic process was aborted. Granted, the Islamist party was not the most enlightened party ever in Algeria, but we have to recognize that Europe, and mostly France, had militantly, worked to abort this process. Look what happened with Hamas later on in 2006 when they were democratically elected. And I'm saying this just to remind people that we should be careful about parallels, but something akin to Christian democracy actually might happen in this country, and actually happened in the sense that, of course, there are a lot of differences, but in the sense that this idea that you can fight Islamism by hiding behind the skirts of authoritarianism is a crazy idea. And if people are not convinced of it right now, we have a problem. But the notion that you will force a society to liberalize by beating it up is a crazy idea. So in other words, we need to find other ways of doing it, which means going through stages where you have to tolerate some people who hold sometimes nasty ideas, granted that they don't spoil the whole game. And this is an important this is an important point, or this is an important evolution that we need to have in our minds while discussing this part of the world, because it is the stumbling block. It is at the core of the idea, of the argument that, okay, we have tried democracy with these guys, it doesn't work. Well, I don't think we really gave it a chance. Talking about Algeria, we have forgotten that in 1994, someone mentioned San Egidio earlier today, talking about the refugees. In 1994, there was, thanks to this Catholic organization, all the Algerian parties, the FIS, the FLN, etc., gathered in San Egidio and decided on a constitution compact, which is even more liberal than what Tunisia has today, even the FIS, with freedom of conscience, etc., etc. But the military in Algeria would have none of it, and they had the support to have none of it. So, in other words, we should not. I think it's a losing proposition to believe that because there are people who are willing to experiment with or attached to political Islam, then democracy should not take hold. Then we should militantly stop a democratic process. I think it's a crazy idea that we need to surpass. A last good news is that I'm proud to come from a country where the civil society formed NGOs, and we have one representative of these NGOs here to help refugees from sub-Saharan Africa. And seriously, you know, not some token work. They did tremendous work. They were NGOs in Morocco from the early 2000s. In other words, these societies are also able to produce civil society organization that goes beyond their very narrow local national interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see a microphone, and I had a first question here in the middle. Please introduce yourself and please be brief, because I see already signals that we should.
How many minutes do I have? Like, okay. Hi. First of all, I want to thank the Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung for inviting me, and Dr. Schaller, who did all the arrangements. My name is Elza Seferian, and I come from Beirut, Lebanon. The reason why I have the mic is because I want to add on the things that Mr. Aboubakr said a while ago about Lebanon hosting refugees. I work for a Danish INGO in Beirut. It's called Danish Refugee Council. And I would like to divide my speech into 3 parts. One is about speech. Okay, quick. Okay, Lebanon. A brief overview of Lebanon and how it's coping with all the refugees. Number 2. About the World Humanitarian Summit. Okay, I'll be quicker. Number 3, it's a suggestion that I would like the EU to implement, hopefully. First...
Could we maybe jump to number 3 directly?
Really?
Yes, please.
Okay. So number 3 is, we're trying ever since the morning to come up with this comprehensive plan to respond to the refugee crisis. Now, all of us know that the refugee crisis is one of its kind to the EU. Like suddenly, as Ms. Harms said a while ago, that the EU had its wake-up call when the refugees were physically in Hungary, in Budapest. So I think, especially with what is going on in Greece right now, the EU needs to extend its hand to aid workers like myself working in Lebanon, people working in Afghanistan and Iraq who already have the experience, and not only have this EU-centric vision of hiring only EU employees, for instance, because I have a lot of connections, my friends, my colleagues who are really experienced and want to go to Lesbos and work and help refugees, but they weren't admitted. They didn't get the visa, and they have over 10 years of experience. I think this is not only an EU problem, I think it's a global problem, and we need to extend hands and to make this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Elza. Sorry, these 2.
My name is David Kipp with the SWP. I have a question to Ms. Newland. Very interesting speech by you. Thank you. It is interesting to see, to look at the US labor market and how it's functioning and the integration at a time where Germany has unprecedented integration challenges. So if you could briefly still add a little bit upon your perspective on this, you know, labor market flexibility and other aspects, how integration actually works, because I don't know if you've heard about the law and that it was decided upon, at least by the government yesterday. We'll see how the parliament looks at it, but that really goes a little bit, I would say, against, at least in parts, against what we know from science.
Thank you. And please, one last question here in yes, exactly there.
Oh, ja. Doch, geht schon. Bär mein Name. Bär mein Name, Westberliner, weil die Mauer zwar gefallen ist, aber die Grenzen sind noch da. Sklaverei wurde nicht angesprochen, will auch keiner. Aber Integration ist, dass jemand sich in eine nationale Region, welche auch immer, integrieren muss, was in der Regel eine Anpassung an die bestehenden Strukturen ist. Und wenn jemand ehrlich zu sich ist, dort findet Ausbeutung statt.
Und Ihre Frage, könnten Sie bitte direkt zur Frage kommen?
Bin ich gleich zur Frage, nämlich, wir sind aber auch einer Transparentisierungsproblematik ausgesetzt, die all diese Ausbeutungsprozesse relativ schnell ermittelt. Und die werden außen vor gelassen. Und da komme ich eben dann zur Frage, unsere Flüchtlinge helfen uns gerade dabei, die ganzen nationalstaatlichen Ausbeutungsprozesse offenzulegen. Dazu muss man ihnen gratulieren. Danke. Und wie kriegen wir uns aus diesem Problem? Zweierlei Dinge gibt es zu tun, denke ich. Das eine ist,
ich dachte, das sei die Frage. Vielleicht können wir das direkt an die Experten so zurückgeben.
Das ist mein Angebot und darüber kann man ja denken, ob man dazu richtig steht. Es gibt nämlich Akteure in den jeweiligen Nationalstaaten oder noch lokal, die gerne legitim helfen wollen, aber die Legitimität nicht hergestellt bekommen für ihr Tun, nämlich helfen zu wollen. Selbst Arbeitgeber fummeln sich Arbeitsverträge zusammen, um sich irgendwie rechtlich abgesichert zu bekommen, die hinten und vorne nicht halten. Und
Gut, vielen Dank. Wir haben, glaube ich, Ihren Punkt
gehört. Und die Flüchtlinge
wir würden jetzt zurückgeben ans Podium.
Und die Flüchtlinge treffen auf Missstände und wissen sich nicht vor Missständen zu verhalten. Und denen muss eine Sicherheit gegeben werden, sich, wenn sie vor Missstände zu verhalten.
Genau.
Ihr lebt ja alle von der Ausbeutung, richtig? Ich
denke, Sie geben jetzt bitte das Mikrofon
ja alle
zurück.
Von der Ausbeutung, richtig. Alle, wie hier sitzen,
ich denke, Sie haben jetzt genug gesagt. Wir haben Ihren Punkt verstanden. Und wenn Sie jetzt bitte das Mikrofon weitergeben würden, dann können wir noch die Antworten auf dem Podium hören. Leider muss ich Sie auch alle noch einmal ermahnen, relativ kurz zu sein und das auch gleich als Ihr Schlusswort zu begreifen.
Okay. Just very quickly on the point that we haven't touched upon, but which came in the question on integration. 3 observations on the discussion on integration that is now the focus domestically. First of all, it's good that the focus has very quickly shifted to integration. Maybe due to low numbers of admissions or arrivals, but it is positive. What is important is to not to solely focus on economic aspects of integration. It's a legal, it's an economic, it's a social, and it's a cultural process. And in particular, the social dimension at the moment is not really in focus, but should be focused on. And it has a lot of aspects it can build on. It is indeed also measures that support local communities and refugees. There is the volunteers and the very high level of engagement to build, in particular, a social integration on. And one last and third aspect I wanted to mention is in the discussion at present and in the legislative design and development of integration measures, the aspect of participation of the persons concerned, of the refugees, is really falls short. It needs to be much more a discussion that involves all stakeholders, but involves in particular in the design and in the implementation of integration measures, needs to involve the refugees themselves.
Kathleen, could you just pick it up there?
Yes, I think that's a very good segue to what I wanted to say. On the U.S. labor market, I mean, I would never pretend that the model that we use is the right model for every country. And I have tremendous respect for European social democracy's achievements in terms of social safety net, and that's an area in which we really have a great deal to learn from Germany, from Sweden, from others. But I would say that our very flexible labor market has advantages, particularly for refugees and migrants who either don't have high levels of skill or have trouble having their skills recognized, which most migrants do in the international system when they move. And what we have seen through our research is that people have the ability in the U.S. labor market to move up. And so this model of people coming in at the bottom of the labor market and then gradually ascending is one that makes room for a lot of people at the bottom, but doesn't trap them there necessarily. It's very interesting to contrast the experience of U.S. immigrants with the experience of African Americans, and slavery was mentioned. I'll rise to that bait. It's been much, much more difficult for American society to integrate African Americans with that heavy legacy of slavery and discrimination than it has been for immigrants who don't have that experience over generations and who therefore have greater basis for being optimistic about their ability to rise through the system. So making room at the bottom for more people also tends to push the people who are already there up the employment ladder, and I think that's perhaps the most important feature of labor mobility in the U.S. is that it's both, people are both geographically mobile and mobile in terms of sort of ascending a skills level.
Thank you.
Oh, can I say just one more thing? That although I am very far from being a libertarian, I do have great respect for the choices that migrants and refugees make about their own lives, and take some pride in the fact that so many of them seem to want to come to the United States. They see opportunity there.
Yeah, about this issue of integration, I'd like to share with you two recent debates that seem to me interesting, although they're still, the jury's still out about them. Some analysts made the observation that the terrorists in Belgium were Moroccans, were of Moroccan origin, and one question that was posed that how come there was none of them who was of Turkish origin, because there is a strong Turkish also community of Turkish origin in Brussels. And some scholars claim that, well, in fact, because the Turks didn't even try to integrate. And because wait a minute, it's an interesting one. And because the Moroccans tried to integrate or did it imperfectly somehow and were in some kind of limbo and lost their grounding, at least this youth. And I think, I don't have a definitive opinion on it, but I think it's worthy of analysis. And then I forgot the second point. Yes, the second. Yes, no. A couple of researchers of scholars in the United States came up with a very, very contentious, heatedly debated idea. They basically ran a statistical regression on the profiles of the recent terrorists. I don't know if it was published in Foreign Affairs, Brookings, yes, and Foreign Affairs. And they came up with, according to them, the single specific feature that all the terrorists share is that they're Francophones, right, from countries that have Francophone culture and that have issues with the veil, etc., etc. And of course, the arrow is pointing toward the French model, the laïcité, the idea of laïcité, and how certain, youth basically take upon them in their fancy that they are basically targeted, and then they act on it in the horrible way we've seen. And I relate that to another interesting research with Mark Sageman. I don't know if you heard about the guy. He's a psychiatrist of French-Polish origin who worked for the CIA, who is coming up with a book in which he basically claims that these terrorists share one characteristic, which is that they feel that they are the avant-garde of a certain community, and they're defending their community by doing what they do. So I just wanted to share with you these ideas. They are heavily contentious. They are, they should, but I think they should be debated.
Thank you. Rebecca?
So I think there is something right in what you said, that these very detailed integration ideas and laws, that they are partly also in reaction to what we call Islamophobia, or fears towards the strangers, yeah. But I think partly they are also trying to reflect negative developments in our societies with real parallel societies. And the question is whether this new strategy will deliver more successes for both sides, so the receiving society and those who are arriving in our societies. I'm not sure. What makes my doubt is that I have in my village, and in my village we are 50 inhabitants. I have there right now 80 citizens, former citizens of Syria, Damascus and cities close to Damascus, and what they really want, all the adults, yeah, is to earn money. So the real wish is to become as soon as possible economically independent from any assistance. And so there is something what I see as a good experience in the model of the United States, but I know very well why the model of the United States right now is not really compatible with our situation. But I'm honest in this in this panel, so I can really understand the refugees in my village, and also in other places I see the same situation. They have spent months or years on the march, yeah, with different obstacles. They have been dependent from people like volunteers, from smugglers, from authorities. Now they are in my village. They have many, many helping hands around them. We are well organized as a welcome society there. But their deep wish is to make again their living on their own. And I'm not sure whether all those integration models we are now discussing are really helpful for this.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Katharina, Kathleen, Aboubakr, and Rebecca. It was amazing contributions of you and Elsa and David. I'm also deeply grateful for the questions from the audience. To wrap it up, I mean, there are basically, I think, really 4 points that we should all take home. The need for burden sharing and a politically better chosen approach, preparation, not only for the short term, but also for the long term, that integration is key, and it has to happen in a clever way, and that we should not mistake authoritarianism for stability. Otherwise, we might really see future problems of an unknown size. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending here. We now finalize here. I'm sorry that there was not more room for question, but I think the input on the panel was amazing, and it was totally worth keeping the time here. Thank you. And thanks to the interpreters.